I want you to pay particular attention to Dr. McDougall and Dr. Saunders. Because those two doctors, one being the chief medical examiner of Broward County, the other one, an associate medical examiner, I think now employed in West Palm Beach, say to you that the first shot to Williams and Thomas were fatal, deadly. Why is that important? Because according to Sergeant Williams, Thomas's injury to his hand came first. It was a defensive wound. We know that couldn't happen based upon the medical testimony. So you either have to disregard the medical examiner and accept what Williams' testimony is, or I suggest, now that you have four experts contradicting Williams' testimony, and that is Bellow, Special Agent, FBI Agent Collins, and two medical examiners, conflict with Williams' testimony, that you should take Williams' testimony and ignore it, toss it out. You can't have it both ways. It just doesn't work. And then we get to really their star witness, two star witnesses. Sergeant Williams. And I think I've talked a bit about him. And I think the most amazing part of his testimony is that he does not get involved in this case until 3 years after the incident. Again, at the request of the state. Again, because they realize they have problems. And I applaud them to recognize they have problems. And miraculously, as I told you earlier, even though the Jeep was searched for hours and hours, processed for hours and hours, he finds additional evidence. 2 projectiles that everyone else missed, and a blood stain that is important. And that when he did his analysis, 2 important things occurred. He didn't go in there blindly to do any analysis. He told you that the prosecutors in this case told them that the defendant in this case was this young man. And we need you to do a trajectory analysis to put him on the scene. Now, I suggest to you, you could have a Jolly Green Giant and a Midget. And if you give them the dimensions, the height and his arm length, with this mathematical formula, you could say the Jolly Green Giant or the Midget was a shooter in this case. They would either be closer to the car or further from the car, depending upon their size. If you want to do an analysis, if you want to do an investigation, if you want to figure out who the shooter is, why do you point to this kid and tell him, this is what we want? Why do you do that? This is the great investigation. This is what they want you to do in order to render a verdict that could take him. And tell him that he's going to live life in the state penitentiary without parole or be on death row? This is the investigation they want you to rely upon and say it's proof beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt? I guess so, according to them. And they call Danny Benitez. Who the heck is he? He was on the stand for all of about 2 minutes. Danny Benitez gave Detective Moretti the surveillance tape from the Montessori school. You watched it. It showed, I suggest, nothing probative to implicate this young man in it. But we learned, not from him, but from Moretti, that he doesn't go to the drugstore on Miramar Parkway to check their surveillance tape. He doesn't go to Applebee's to check their surveillance tape. He doesn't go to Polo Tropical or the gas station or the bank on Miramar Parkway to check their surveillance tapes. When the car's on 184th Avenue, he doesn't go to the fire station to check their tapes, surveillance tapes. Doesn't go back to the 2 elementary schools, Sunset Lakes and West Broward Elementary, to check their surveillance tape, because he knows it all. He knows it. How do you know it if you don't check? How do you know something unless you investigate? We don't have to do a thing, folks. We don't have to do anything except show up. And begrudgingly, we did. Where the Montessori school was, on Pines, there was a tractor supply company and another school. Why don't you get that? And come in here and say, you know what, folks? We checked all of this. Instead, what they do is take a helicopter ride 4 or 5 years later. And we have to sit here and watch as they fly the route. And we have to watch how they drive the route. Not checking what the traffic conditions were that day, back 4 or 5 years ago. Not checking what the weather was 5 years ago in October 26th. What's the purpose of that? Just to add more of what I suggest is a smokescreen. You look at all this and say, heck, man, 100 exhibits, 500 photographs out of a cell phone, all these text messages. What does it mean? Hopefully, for the state, you'll say, hey, where there's smoke, there must be fire. And say, hey, too bad, young man, too bad. There's a lot of stuff sitting here. And hopefully you will not fall into that trap. And then we get to the lead detective. Well, before we get to the lead detective, I think I missed someone. Trevion Glass, the individual who got into the red Mitsubishi. The man who is convicted of 2 felonies. Now, why is that important? Because the judge read you an instruction on some of the factors to look at in determining whether or not to believe a witness or not. And he told you that one of the factors to look at is whether or not the witness has been convicted of a crime. Trevion Glass, the state calls, as their star witness, basically, to say Melly never got into that red Mitsubishi. and he told you one interesting thing. He said he's got a case pending right now, and he doesn't want to go back to jail. Now, who has the authority to put him in jail? We don't. There's only one person who can put him back in jail. And that's the state of Florida, whether it be through the state attorney's office or the police department.